A series of heartfelt videos have been going viral on Twitter of everyday Canadians sharing their desperation. Here's a sample.
I can't afford the rent these days. Like, I'm just feeling so much despair.
I don't understand how I make $34 an hour and I can't function. What I've started doing is I buy a loaf of rye bread and I work really hard to keep that one loaf of rye bread lasting me the whole week.
I usually talk about the US since what's happening here is pretty much happening across the West, but things are bad in our neighbor to the north. The videos are raw, shot by middle-class or working-class Canadian women. The common thread is how the hell Canadians are surviving. Between inflation and taxes, wages are barely enough to live on. One woman is stretching a loaf of rye bread to get through the week. What's left is soaked up in soaring rents, and don't even think about buying a house. The Canadian housing bubble is truly epic. Since 2000, home prices and household debt have almost quadrupled. In Vancouver, they're up almost 5 times. That's about twice what's happened in the US. In raw numbers, Canadian house prices compared to income are now over twice what they are in the US, and Canada's household debt is now the highest in the G7, over 100% of income. That's 30 points higher than the US. If the average Canadian buys the average Canadian house right now, the mortgage would cost 48% of pre-tax income. That's pre-tax. In Vancouver, Toronto, it's closer to 70%. Nationwide, including rural areas, the average house in Canada is close to $500,000 US. Keep in mind, thanks to socialism, Canada's much poorer than America. If Canada were a state, it would be poorer than West Virginia or Mississippi. So imagine a $500,000 house in West Virginia, and that's where the rye bread comes in. And remember that taxes are also much higher in Canada. In fact, that's a big reason why Canada is poorer than West Virginia. So you've got a $500,000 house in West Virginia with New York City taxes. Okay, so don't buy a house. Well, that just means you are paying the rent on somebody else's $500,000 mortgage. CTV reported rents across Canada have soared by 20% in 2 years. In British Columbia and Ontario, it's closer to 30%. And CBC reports 1 in 6 renters spend over half their income on rent. That's fully 40% who spend more than a third. The upshot is that, as according to Stats Canada, over 40% of the Canadian middle class cannot meet everyday expenses. 1 in 10 are only making ends meet by borrowing from friends or family. This is the middle class. Meanwhile, again per Stats Canada, for the majority of Canadians in the bottom quintile, quote, the major source of income is government transfers. So socialism at top, they steal, they peel off a slice to buy voters, and the middle class gets to carry the entire Ponzi scheme. What is next for Canadians? The next election is 2 years off, and while the populist Poilievre is leading at the moment, Canadian media and institutions are even more left-wing than America. So expect more pain, more squeezing small businesses, more inflationary deficits and crony handouts, more mass immigration outpacing home construction, more speech codes to shut you up. Eventually, Canadians get angry enough to evict the clowns, but there are years of pain between here and there. Okay, we'll be watching. See you next time.